Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. In this one, my friends, I'm going to be testing a GeForce GTX 1066GB in Marvel's Spider-Man 2. This one is the MSI Gaming X version of the card. I am running it with the latest Nvidia drivers and I'm not manually overclocking it. You can see all of its specs right here in Tech Power-Ups GPU-Z, and over on the left I'm pairing it with the i5-12600KF CPU, overclocked to 5.1 GHz and 32GB of RAM. Let's get into it, shall we? Alright, let's go over the settings first. I think we should stick to 1080p for this video, since this is actually above system requirements, and the GTX 1650 from the minimum system requirements was actually doing a decent job at 1080p low settings. But to start this off, we'll do very high, okay? And then we're gonna try high, medium, low, and very low. So let's do this. Oh boy, okay, oof. So, to be expected, this is not going to be a playable experience on a GTX 1060, guys, at very high settings. Obviously it's still kind of cinematic, but that frame time graph, I'm wondering why they still haven't optimized the freaking game and at least fixed the stuttering issues with the frame time graph, because this is pretty unacceptable, guys. Obviously, as I showed in my previous Spider-Man 2 videos, you can lock your FPS and get rid of that stuttery mess of a frame time graph, but yeah, this is pretty unacceptable. It will stutter even on a 5090 if you're wondering. It's not because of the GTX 1060, you know? So yeah, this is the terrible experience with the GTX 1060 at very high settings. Another fix for the frame time graph is enabling frame generation, by the way, but I think we will need something else other than frame generation to make it playable. Let's try like quality FSR here, and this makes the game render at 720p, it upscales to 1080p, and it adds FG over it. And in terms of input lag, it is a pretty terrible experience, guys. Moving the camera around and stuff, yep, doesn't feel good whatsoever. It looks like it's playable on YouTube because, well, we're getting 40s and 50s, and now the frame time is flat for the most part. But in terms of the input lag, first of all, if you do this really fast, that happens. So you can't really move your mouse around very fast here, okay? If you, it's pretty funny actually. And second of all, the input lag is about the same input lag as 20 frames per second, so it's terrible, okay? It's completely unplayable like this, and we should definitely move on now. So I'm gonna disable the frame generation as well as FSR over here. We're back to native resolution. I think I'll add TAA. I really don't like this, but FSR AA and XEAA are actually really intensive on the GTX 1060, and SMAA looks very aliased still in this game, so I guess I'll settle for TAA. I'm sorry, guys. And here we have it, guys. No more aliasing, at least. You know what? The TAA implementation in this game is actually not completely terrible. I thought it was going to be a lot blurrier than this. Maybe it's because I'm using a 1080p monitor today. Actually a dual mode monitor. It's 4K, but it also does 1080p natively. It's very nice. I really like that feature. Yeah, and it ends up looking a lot better than just dropping the resolution down to 1080p on a native 4K display, and this way I can actually use it for a lot of resolutions testing in my videos, and while making it crispy at 1080p still. But anyways, this is not why we're here. Of course, we're here to see the GTX 1060 performance, and even on high settings, it's a bit too much for this card at 1080p native resolution. It's a bit of a shame because I believe in Spider-Man Remastered it was playable with this GPU at high settings, or was it medium? I know this was the recommended GPU requirement for Spider-Man Remastered. That game also looked really, really good, you know, and this coupled with an i7 4770K, overclocked slightly, was doing 60 FPS just fine in that game without stuttering issues whatsoever. Yet here in Spider-Man 2, it drops to 20s. This is not medium settings, I know, but I guess that's expected. Once again, the game is actually quite detailed here at the high settings. I like it. It got some decent textures as well, even on high. Nice reflections, even without ray tracing, but it is too intensive. 1060 is 8 years old at this point, guys, so can't really expect miracles. Actually, the 1080 Ti is 8 years old. The 1060 will actually be 9 years old this year, guys. That's pretty crazy. I still remember going out to the store to buy this GTX 1060 that I have here and that I am testing right now. This is the exact one that I bought back in 2016 when it first came out. I wanted the RX 480 from AMD because it was a big leap in performance. It was cheaper than GTX 1060, but I ended up getting this one because the 480 was always out of stock. And I could actually find the 1060, you know. It was also out of stock, but this model right here wasn't. And still working just fine up to this day. Although, well, not so well in Spider-Man 2. I should try Kingdom Come Deliverance next, actually. The second one, of course. That should run pretty well. Anyway. Pretty terrible experience, once again, even if we enable frame generation plus FSR on quality, which again renders the game at 720p and upscales to 1080p, and it looks really bad in this one, even though it's FSR 3.1, and in the first one, in the remastered Spider-Man, it looked pretty good. In this one, it's really pixelated, guys. I don't know what they did to the FSR 3.1 implementation. It's usually decent. In this one, it's pretty terrible, especially when compared to the LSS. But hey, we're getting 60s instead of those 40s, and well, it still drops into the 50s, unfortunately. The baseline FPS were almost always above 30, aside from these bushy areas with a lot of vegetation, trees, and so on, where it dropped into the 20s. So input lag isn't nearly as bad as it was before, but it's still pretty terrible. Alright, but I think this got to a point in terms of input latency at the moment to where a controller wouldn't feel too terrible in this game. It would still be a bad experience and you could still notice the input lag with the controller with these FPS and frame generation, but at this point I wouldn't say it's completely unplayable, okay? Some people might actually enjoy it like this. I certainly wouldn't though. But that's just me. I prefer 30 FPS flat, locked, you know. And still, guys, if I do this really quick, it breaks everything. So yeah, do not do that really quick. I guess you can't really do that with a controller either, so there's that. Come on, how does that frame time graph without frame generation get by in the development all the way to the full release of the game? It's ridiculous to me, guys. All right, let's try that again, you know, to see that terrible stuttery mess of a frame time graph. See that? Yeah. Also, if you were wondering, 1080p high FSR quality, no frame gen, still drops into the 20s at times. Pretty bad stuff. Okay, it's obviously a bit better than it was at native, but it's not to the point where it becomes 30 plus all of the time, and that would be ideal. So yeah, so far, so bad. Let's quit the game and let's disable FSR once again, keep TAA there, 1080p and medium settings. So here, if the 1060 is faster than the GTX 1650 in this game, it usually is quite a bit faster, you know, up to like 40% faster in some games, but not in the recent ones, unfortunately. But yeah, if that lead shows up here in Spider-Man 2 as well, that makes this GPU run above 30 FPS 100% of the time. I'm not sure if it will, though, because we're already seeing 30s around here. We'll need to see it in that very big vegetation area, you know. Actually, there's another very big park on the left here, so let's try that out. Inside of the bushes, still dropping into the 20s, guys. Okay, so it doesn't happen too often, fortunately, right? So let's see it over here. Inside of these vegetations, 24. You know what, at this point I'm thinking there's not much we can do to make it not drop from 30 FPS. I almost said 60 there, but yeah, from 30 FPS in these areas. It's really bad. And also, even without frame generation, I can make the game literally stop by doing this. It's ridiculously unoptimized, this one. Anyway, let's try enabling FSR 3.1 on quality. A lot of people like to play like this. I think, again, it's really pixelated, but it does give us a decent bump in performance from the 40s to 60 there. And maybe this way we can stay above 30 FPS all of the time inside of bushes. Certainly doesn't drop over here in this area. That's good. And I'm going to start counting RF. You know what? Starting the FPS counter is kind of redundant because the FPS 1% lows will always be absolutely atrocious, right? It hasn't dropped to 18 FPS, but it shows 18 right there because this frame time graph is probably the worst frame time graph that I've ever seen recently. Even Ark Survival Ascended, guys. That game, I tested it recently on the 5090, that had one of the worst frame time graphs that I've ever seen because of forced frame generation. Alright? And frame generation was broken there. This is not with forced frame generation. This is real FPS right now, and that's the frame time graph. It's ridiculous. And I gave them a bit of time to see if they would fix the game, you know. I've only been testing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which is very well optimized once again, and I love it. But yeah, I've been avoiding Spider-Man because they haven't fixed it yet. And, well, I thought, well, maybe after 3 or 4 days they released a patch because this is absolutely unacceptable, but they still haven't. What the hell? Anyway, guys, with these FPS, I would just lock the FPS to 30. It's a shame that you need to do this to have a flat frame time graph. That's how the graph is supposed to look like, by the way. Yeah, this is how it should be. It now feels good. It feels responsive. This isn't with the frame generation, so input lags are great. And yeah, this is probably how I'd end up playing this game on a GTX 1066GB, because medium settings looks decent. It's a bit too pixelated though, so I wish the FSR implementation would be better, but I guess they didn't really optimize anything on the upscaler. I mean, they didn't even optimize the actual game to run properly, so you can't expect anything, right? But yeah, this is acceptable in terms of visual fidelity, I think, and we got rid of all of those stuttering issues. And now we can play the game with locked 30 FPS. It's not ideal, of course, especially when the first game looked so good still and played with 60 FPS on the 1060, native resolution as well. But hey, it is playable. You can definitely enjoy the game like this. Let's enable the frame generation. Actually, let's still use the 30 FPS lock. Oh my god. These are 30 FPS with frame generation, of course. And the input lag is like the highest that I've seen so far. It actually does skip some frames, I think. We're seeing a lot of little stutters, but they aren't showing in the frame time graph. So obviously with the frame generation, you need to disable the FPS lock. And here, why are we getting 30s? What the hell? I disabled the FPS lock. GPU usage is at 50%. And we're getting 30 to 40. This is worse than it was before. What is happening, game? I'll just restart, guys. What the hell? Okay, so now it's back to 99% usage on that GPU, and we're seeing decent FPS. Something fishy was going on previously. I don't know what. It's pretty smooth now, though. And in terms of input lag with mouse and keyboard, it's getting to the point where it's kind of acceptable to me at least, but it's still not quite there, okay? And always having, oh my god, those... Oh, did you see the frame generation there? What it did to the picture when I opened the wingsuit? That was terrible. But yeah, in some situations, this input lag would still annoy the hell out of me, guys. It's good for swinging around, though, and exploring the world and stuff, but in some situations, it will actually be very annoying. Now we're back to native 1080p, and I think next thing to do is try low settings here. Let's go. This is still pretty... Oh! The loading of the trees. Okay, now they're all loaded. It's fine. But it is still pretty bad, I would say, guys. Right? I mean, it's still 40s, low 30s, or low 40s, actually, and high 30s. I don't like this. The frame time graph is still pretty terrible. It's still not enough to achieve like 60, even on average. Not even 50 on average, honestly. The thing is, if it wasn't for that micro stuttering and that frame time graph being really terrible here below 60 FPS, because when you're above 60 FPS, it starts to smooth out slowly and it gets to a point where it's not bad and you can't really notice a lot of the micro stutters, but with below 60 FPS you can definitely notice all of those micro stutters, and it's pretty annoying. Like, it makes 40 FPS feel like 30 FPS. Yeah. Anyways. So can we get 30 plus at least over here? Yeah, I think so. I think it hasn't dropped yet into the 20s. So finally, we achieved the 30 plus FPS experience that I was looking for to lock your FPS to 30 and not drop any time whatsoever. Okay, 30 there, 29. It still drops. It still drops. But it's not by a lot. Okay, I could live with this. Honestly, I could even live with the medium settings and 30 FPS capped with the FSR quality. But here we're having a native 1080p experience at the very least, so you don't need to deal with the pixelation that comes from FSR quality. But honestly, guys, even without FSR, this is still a bit pixelated around Spider-Man. Yeah, this is with TAA, which is weird because it's usually a super blurry mess, and it is still, but there's still pixelation happening. But yeah, you can have native 1080p experience with TAA if you don't mind it at 30 plus FPS, so you already know that, for example, locking the FPS to 30 will have that 30 FPS locked experience all of the time, so no micro stuttering anymore, and it will feel okay. Although 30 FPS in this game, I'm not sure if it's the monitor or something. 30 FPS in this game sometimes feels like it's skipping frames. Like, look at this. I'm pretty sure it's not the monitor, because it's happening as well on the capture card. Yeah, it feels a little bit better than having that stuttery mess of a frame time graph, but it still doesn't feel quite right, in my opinion. But well, guys, that was the performance at 1080p low settings, and now we should go down to very low settings, which is still not the minimum, because these two can still go lower, as you can see, but I'll keep it on very low. I mean, we don't really need to go to the absolute lowest with the 1060. And well, it's getting 50s now, still not enough for 60 FPS. It's a bit of a shame to see a game that, on very low settings, it looks worse than the previous one, Spider-Man Remastered, on medium or high. Yet, on medium or high, this was getting 60 FPS in that game with a smooth frame time graph. And here, you need to drop it to very low to achieve 50s. It's not even 60 average. This is performing worse than the remastered Spider-Man. This game is actually an outlier in terms of optimization. Nix's usually does a pretty decent job with the PC ports, aside from like memory leak issues that they usually fix after a few weeks, you know. But in this one, they haven't fixed that terrible frame time, which is very needed to fix. So yeah, very disappointing once again. You can lock the FPS to 30 if you want to. I think over here I will choose to use some FSR on quality. Let's see how that does. I forgot to use it on low, actually. I think, maybe. Anyway, let's do it here on very low settings. And now it gets closer to that 60 FPS. Okay. Yeah, a little bit better, although it still drops into the 50s, so it's still not a good baseline to enable frame generation and have a close to seamless experience. You can still notice the input lag when you have baseline of 60 FPS, but then it's kind of negligible for single-player titles like this one that are also third-person. But yeah, over here it's not even achieving that. It's still dropping a lot into the 50s, so that's the problem with frame generation. People think it's good for lower-end systems, but you need 60 FPS baseline. So if you don't get that, lower-end systems with FG will still feel really input laggy. They will just look smoother. Like right now, 90 FPS, 100 FPS, pretty good stuff. It looks very smooth on YouTube, right? But in terms of input lag, it's quite a bit better than it was on medium settings, for example. So at least there's that. But it's still very noticeable, guys. So I wouldn't really buy this game to play like this on a GTX 1060. And I don't think I will recommend buying this game if you have a GTX 1060. It's a bit of a shame, once again, after seeing the first game run really well on this card. But yeah, the second one, it's only playable with FG. And then the input lag just goes to hell, basically. This is why I like to test Kingdom Come Deliverance. See, guys? Because that game's so well optimized, and it doesn't make me sad. And all of the other games that I try, they just make me sad sometimes. What is this? Now it crashed. The timing on that, guys. I was ready to say my goodbyes and then it just crashed. I can't say that you know what? Explain the problem. The problem is you didn't optimize this game and it deserved better. We PC gamers deserve better. Please fix. Thank you. Stuttering is unbearable. I think that's a pretty good explanation of the problem, right? So yeah, that's been it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Stay away if you have 1060. In my opinion, it's not a good experience, but you've seen it for yourselves now. As always, love you all. Bye-bye.